I left because I couldn't live with myself anymore for the way we were controlling people, the way when people left we had to get them back against their will.
Tell me about that. How would you do that?
Well, a lot of people would blow, as the Scientologists say, would leave without permission. And then we'd call everyone, all their relatives, friends. We'd call up airports, have contacts there, post offices, telecom, all that kind of stuff, and get the person back. Either we'd go there and they would be blackmailed with their ethics folder. In these ethics folders there would be very intimate things in crime sometimes, theft, or, I mean, in the one case I know a man, and he had sex with he'd paid for sex with children, and when he blew we got him back because we said either you come back or we're going to use this against you. Or you would physically get somebody back. You would physically go to the house where they were, drag them into the car and take them back. Or you would just stop them physically from leaving the estate. The security guards.
So it wasn't you, it was the security guard?
Oh, no, I didn't do that. The security was responsible for that. I wouldn't have been strong enough to do that anyway.
Did anyone question, in the case of the man having sex with little boys, did anyone question that they should go to the authorities?
No.
So that crime was okay as long as he wasn't in Scientology?
Well, that crime was okay as long as he paid for auditing. Because, you know, auditing can, you know, cure any diseases, any sicknesses, any mental illnesses, and make everything turn out right again.
So you knew that they were disclosing information from these folders. Did you feel comfortable in your auditing sessions telling your private thoughts? Well,
the thing with me was that I didn't have anything to tell. I didn't have any crimes to tell besides that I had stolen some money from my parents, like smaller amounts, to buy teenage magazines or go and get stuff.
There weren't private thoughts that you had that you were worried about?
No.
Let me ask you, did you ever have a negative thought about L. Ron Hubbard?
No, I didn't. Never. I had a lot of negative thoughts about other people. Because when I was in the Sea Org, you know, I was convinced that L. Ron Hubbard had written the tech, and the tech was right, but that we were not using it correctly, or other people were not using it correctly.
So did you ever complain to people in the Sea Org that, or in the chain of command, that you thought you were out tech?
Constantly. Always writing reports, and I was always getting into trouble. And eventually I started writing reports and making copies all the way up to RTC. With every single report that I wrote went to RTC. And I got into a lot of trouble for it, which is also out tech, off policy.
What type of trouble?
You'd get called into the office of some senior or some officer, and he would shout at you, humiliate you. He would put you on mess work, make you clean toilets, and all sorts of stuff like that.
So this was not officially the RPF, but they would force you to do
but you would regularly, I mean, I would anyway, because of reports, and if they considered I was out ethics, then that's what they would do. I was stopped by the security guards of HCO and dragged into one of the towers in the castle and locked in a room with some paper and a pen to write up my OWs, my overts and withholds. And then I was guarded permanently after that.
For how long?
For about 2 weeks.
2 weeks? Were you allowed to come and go? Or?
No, well, not the first few days, but then I was allowed to sleep in my dorm, in my room, with the other girls, but there was somebody outside the door. You would get guarded onto the bus, off the bus. Weren't allowed to make any private phone calls outside. Was put on mess work, isolated, nobody spoke to me, which was really torture, so you gave up very quickly.
So even though you were in the dorm with the other girls, they couldn't talk to you?
No.
They wouldn't talk to you?
No.
There wasn't any of them that would whisper? Or...
No. Well, there was one girl who went through the same phases that I went through, who also wanted to leave, and we weren't allowed to tell each other, but we knew it. And then she was also put on messed work. We weren't allowed to work together. And, you know, we'd make comments when nobody was around, and nothing specific or nothing exact, but just so we knew about it. But that was the only girl who did that.
This lasted for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Then I gave up. My will was broken, and I said I want to be a good SEAL member again. And I worked out a plan to leave, because I figured I wasn't going to be able to leave like this. So I went back onto my post and was working well, and my stats were up again. And after a few weeks, I suddenly said, oh, my dad is ill. And then a few weeks later, he was in hospital, and then it was getting worse and worse, but over a few weeks. And suddenly he was dying. And because I was working well and always, you know, uptone, happy, helping here wherever I could, nobody suspected anything.
So, but your dad was fine the entire time?
He was fine, yeah.
And no one checked into that?
No. And then it came to the point where I had to do my leave of absence, sec check, and I was petrified of that because, you know, you can't lie to the e-meter, and you can't get around it. And I was so petrified, and I went into my first session, and I'm holding the cans, and I don't know what question she asked me, but I just remember that I panicked, and she said, what was that? And I was like, oh my God. And then in that same moment I thought, oh no, now I'm not going to be able to see my friends, and I was looking so forward to having time off. And then suddenly she said, okay, that's fine. And then I thought, wait a minute, you know, if she asks me a question and I think about how happy I'm going to be, then it should work out, which is exactly what I did. And sometimes she would say, what was that? And I would go, oh, that was once when I came late to post, and oh, that I talked badly about somebody, so little things. But most of the time I would just think about seeing my dad and seeing my sister and having time off, and that's how I got around the sec check. That's how I lied to the e-meter.
So you made it through, and were you able to leave immediately then? Or?
Yeah.
And did you go home to your dad?
First I went up to the north of England to my relatives, to my aunt, and she said to me as well, you shouldn't go back. She didn't want me to go back.
Your aunt wasn't involved?
No, only my dad for my family. And she said, well, you know, sell your story to a newspaper, and then they should pay for you to go back home. And that's what I did. I got in contact with a journalist from a magazine, and I flew to Stuttgart, which is where my dad was staying, and I told my dad I'm happy in the Sea Org and I don't want to stay there. And, you know, he said, no, you have to go back, you have to go back. So then I just left the subject. I didn't talk to him about it anymore. And while I was in Stuttgart, I flew from Stuttgart to Berlin to meet this journalist, and he introduced me to Ursula Caberta in Hamburg. He didn't tell me we were going to meet her. He just said we're going to see a specialist. And when we were outside her office, and he said, oh, yeah, now we're going to see Ursula Caberta, and I almost died of shock because I was so petrified of this woman, this monster, this enemy number one against Scientology. I was petrified. I really was petrified. And I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to die of a lung disease or something. I'd have an accident. Something terrible was going to happen. We went into her office, and, you know, I was, you know, very quiet and didn't really want to talk about anything. And then this journalist got up and said he wants to take pictures of me. And I didn't want him to take pictures, but I would never have said no. And then she said, no pictures, no pictures. And then I suddenly thought, okay, I can trust her, because she was protecting my interests, and she knew exactly how I felt, which surprised me. And so from that moment on, I trusted her. I just trusted her automatically from then. And during this interview with this journalist, he suddenly asked me, do you have any proof for what you're saying? And I thought about it, and I said, no. And he said, you don't have any documents, any pictures, nothing? And I said, no, well, not here, in England. And he said, oh, is there any way you can get hold of that? And I said, well, if I go back, sure, I can get hold of it, because they're not suspicious of anything yet. And Ursula said, no way you're going back, way too dangerous. And I said, well, I can't